And also, I want to also share my screen. All right, so where I left off with you last week, last lesson was we were talking about learning. Specifically, we were talking about classical conditioning. Now, with classical conditioning, as I had explained, the stimulus precedes the behavior, right? So in other words, something prompts a behavior to occur. And if you could, I'm hearing a little bit of noise. If you could, please mute your microphone. So that's not coming through. So anyway, the stimulus precedes the behavior, elicits the behavior, and the behavior occurs. And that's how we can tell that learning has happened, is because behavior has either repeated or it has altered based on the stimulus that was provided. Okay. Usually with classical conditioning, in most cases, we do have it is triggered by biological senses. Okay, so as we learned with Pavlov's dog, it was a biological. It was hunger. It was the hunger that was driving the dog to salivate, right? And the stimulus was the meat powder that had made that possible, right? And sorry, bear with me here. All right. So anyway, trying to set something up. All right. So anyway, that's how classical conditioning occurs. Now with operant conditioning, it's quite opposite. We have the behavior that occurs, and then we have the stimulus. We have something that occurs afterwards. We call it a consequence instead of a stimulus, because it happens after the behavior occurs. And based on the favorability or unfavorability of that occurrence, that could either stop that behavior from occurring again, or it could promote that behavior to reoccur. Okay, and that's how we know that learning has been achieved, if that behavior is either altered or if it has optimized for screen share. Sorry, I'm doing too many things here. Learning how to operate technology all over again. All right, so let me share my screen so I can kind of take some notes here and explain how operant conditioning occurs. Okay. All right, so can you all see my screen?
It's white.
Okay, good. Let me see if I can get my pen to work here. There we go. All right. So operant conditioning happens it happens different because the behavior causes, instead of a stimulus, we're going to call it a consequence. Okay. Now, similar to what we had with classical conditioning, I have some pretty important terms to discuss with you. So we have, the first one is called a reinforcement. Okay, that is one of the possible consequences that we can have. Okay, I'll make a little graph here to make this easy. The second type of term that we have is called a punishment. I'm going to describe the difference between the two of these here in just a minute. Okay. So reinforcement and punishment, those are one of the two consequences that we can have. Now within those, we can have positive reinforcement or punishment, or we can have negative reinforcement and punishment. Okay. And I'm going to get back to this slide in just a minute, but so with reinforcement, what we look at with reinforcement, what we look at with reinforcement is, are we promoting a behavior? Okay. So are we looking to increase a behavior or decrease a behavior? Because those are the two outcomes that we want with any kind of learning. So reinforcement means that we are increasing, we are promoting that behavior to happen again. Okay. With punishment, we want to what? We want to decrease the behavior. Okay. And that's really all the difference is between reinforcement and punishment. Is what is the outcome? What are we measuring the outcome to be? Is the behavior going to increase or is it going to decrease? And that's just positive reinforcement. Or I'm sorry, that's reinforcement and that's punishment. All right. So let me give you an example here. Okay. So I always like to, I think I've used this example before because it stands out the most. We had, when I lived in Alaska, for whatever reason, I can't remember, late at night, I needed something for work the next day and nothing was open on base. So I had to go to Walmart about 11 o'clock midnight. And I saw, I'm going to call him Billy. His name was Billy because his parents had called him that. Billy was probably around 3-4 years old, and he's running around in a diaper, no shirt, and boots on around Walmart, just riding bikes and tearing things off the wall, and just doing normal kids things for Walmart at midnight. Okay, if that's a normal thing. So anyway, I don't know if any of you have gone to either a Walmart or Kmart or something. They have those big red, those big bins with the bouncy balls in them. And Billy happened to see a red ball that was about his height, and he pulled it out of that bin. And he wanted that ball. And he went up to his dad and said, I want. And his dad said no, and took the ball and put it back in the bin. Well, wouldn't you know it, what do you think Billy's response to that was? What do you think Billy did? Anybody? Take any guesses? Oh, come on. Work with me here.
He absolutely lost his mind and threw a fit.
He threw a tantrum. Absolutely. So Billy proceeded to throw himself on the floor, scream and holler, bang his head on the floor, and even go up to some of the other aisles and just ripping things off the wall. He went absolutely ballistic. What do you think his parents, being the great parents that they were at the time, bringing him in half naked into Walmart, what do you think that they did to remedy this situation?
Well, I'm willing to wager they gave him a swat on the ass.
No, but that would have been, that would be a great example of punishment. I'll explain that here in a minute. They gave him the ball. They decided in order to stop that behavior, they gave him the ball. So what did they do with that behavior? What are we going to see that behavior do in the future?
They just reinforced the bad behavior.
Exactly. So giving him that big red ball caused Billy to say, hey, I got what I wanted out of this. And it now acted as a reinforcement. Okay. Now, Ken, you brought up something. I think the word was swat on the ass, right? What would we see if that were to occur? If he were somehow provided punishment for that? We would see a what in behavior?
We're definitely going to see a decrease in the behavior.
We would see a decrease in the behavior. Okay. So that's really the difference between reinforcement and punishment. If we provide something that increases that behavior, it's reinforcement. If we provide something that is going to be unfavorable or aversive, we're going to see a decrease in that behavior. Okay. So that's the difference between reinforcement and punishment. Now with positive, now we can have two types of reinforcement and two types of punishment. Okay. We can have positive reinforcement and we can have negative reinforcement. Okay. So with positive and negative, and this is where I always caution students, don't get tripped up on the word positive and negative, because we always think as positive as being good and negative as being bad. Or if you have COVID, positive as being bad and negative as being good, right? So it depends on your perspective. But for purposes of operant conditioning, positive is applying something, and negative is take away. Okay. So how does that apply to reinforcement and punishment? Well, in the case of Billy, all right, what they did with Billy is they provided something favorable to increase that behavior, okay? So we would call that positive because they applied something positive. They applied something good to, what's that? Did somebody say something? Okay. Anyway, so to increase behavior. Okay. That's all that means is we apply something, in this case, good, in order to increase behavior. Now let's look at the flip side of what Billy did to condition his parents, because we just reinforced Billy's behaviors, but what did we do with the parents' behaviors, do you think? What do you think they're likely going to do every time Billy throws a tantrum? If they gave him the red ball and that stopped behavior, what do you think that the parents are going to do later? Any guesses?
Every time he throws a tantrum, give him what he wants.
Right. That's going to be the likelihood. So we increased behavior with the parents too, didn't we? But in this case, Billy's training to them was sorry. I'm writing in the wrong spot. All right. So in order to increase their behavior, he's doing what? He's taken away something bad. Which is what? His tantrum. So as long as the parents do what he wants to do, he doesn't throw a fit. Okay. So he is negatively reinforcing that behavior with the parents. Okay. Does that make sense? Are we pretty clear on how that works so far? All right. So with punishment, now punishment is when we provide something to do what with behavior? Decrease behavior, right? Sorry, I know I'm doing a lot of. So both of these, we're going to see a decrease in behavior. So when we're providing positive punishment, what would be something that we would apply in order to decrease behavior? Do you think? Any guesses?
Timeout sessions.
Okay, maybe. That one is kind of it's kind of a gray area. It really depends on the effectiveness of timeout. Okay, but probably the most popular one. Ken had mentioned it earlier. Ken, what did you say?
That big old swat on the butt.
Okay, spanking. Okay, that's probably the most classic example. Okay. So we're providing something aversive, providing something bad, applying something bad to decrease behavior, okay? And that's exactly what spanking is. Now, Hunter, you had mentioned timeout, okay? Timeout, it can be, if it's applying something bad, such as isolation, then like for a period of time, then yes, that would fall under punishment. So for example, if we were to say every time that like Billy does something inappropriate, we're going to put you in timeout for 5 minutes, okay, or 4 minutes, or however long the parents. Usually, it's about a minute for every year of age that the child is, okay. That remains consistent throughout. That's an aversive action that we're applying to decrease behavior. Now, there is a flip side to that. That if we put Billy in isolation until his behavior improves, we are now applying something what? We're now taking away, right? We're now taking away a liberty or freedom or isolation or something until the behavior improves, okay? grounding, for example. Maybe some of you have had an Xbox taken from you or a PlayStation taken from you until your grades improve or something like that. That would be an example of negative punishment. Okay. It's not bad punishment. It's just taken away. All right. Are we clear on how these work so far? Did any of you have any issues with the homework that this kind of cleared up? I could go through some examples if you like.
Are you talking about the quiz?
Either the quiz or this is from last week, or the homework that we had last week.
The quiz is what I had the most trouble with out of anything. I didn't have too much trouble with the homework. It was just the quiz.
Okay.
Me too as well. I had to take the quiz like 9 times.
Okay. And did it have, was it operant conditioning that you're having a hard time with?
Yeah, it was like the difference between determining which one is the right answer and which one isn't.
Okay. Yeah.
Because they all sounded the same.
Okay. And again, I recorded this so that you would be able, and hopefully you took some good notes, because I know this is really hard stuff. You know, it takes a lot of practice to actually break this down and understand how this works. So that's kind of why I wanted to break it down for you today. And I would say probably the biggest trip up that we get is the positive, the difference between positive and negative. And the positive is when we apply something, and the negative is when we take something away. Okay, so that if you can look at this chart and decipher based on those behaviors, and even apply that to your homework assignment, because your homework assignment was operant conditioning as well. So if, by the way, we should be back in class on Thursday. I think I've been cleared as of tomorrow to return to class. But if for whatever reason you have questions about the quiz and you want to write them down or print them off or copy and paste them or whatever, and bring them into class, I would certainly be willing to discuss them in class for you too. Okay. All right. So along the lines of, make this one green, schedule of reinforcement with operant conditioning. Okay, this is probably another high missed area on your quizzes and your homework. Schedule of reinforcement. With schedule of reinforcement, this is how we reinforce a behavior to increase over time or decrease over time or whatever. Okay, and we look at that. Excuse me. In terms of interval, and ratio. Okay, so with interval, interval has to do with time. How much time has elapsed before we've either reinforced or we provided some kind of consequence, okay? Ratio has to do with occurrence. Okay, so how many times does it occur before something is reinforced? And I think the best example, I asked this before, how many of you like Starbucks? And I think quite a few hands went up in the class before. But if you think about, maybe some of you have, I don't have one, but I've seen it, is one of these buy 6, get 1 free, Frappuccino, Wappuccino, Maca Latte, or whatever they're called there. But if you get so many of them, then you get a free one. So what they're doing is they're promoting over, if you purchase 6, then you get 1 free. So the ratio is 1 to 6, or I'm sorry, 1 to 7. So out of 7, you get 1 free. Okay. And that promotes you doing what? That promotes the likelihood that you're going to go back and purchase Frappuccino, Wappuccino, Maca Latte, whatever you want to call it. I don't know what they call these fancy drinks anymore. I just get black coffee, sometimes with cream and sugar when I'm feeling a little frothy, pun intended there. So anyway, we call that a fixed interval because it happens after certain occurrences, after a number of occurrences. Okay, I'll just put that number of occurrences. So that's a fixed number, 1 out of 6 in that, or 1 out of 7 in that situation. All right. The second type of ratio we have is variable, which means it could happen. The number of times may vary. We don't know how many times it would be. So that'd be like getting a punch card with maybe 50 circles on it. And they just arbitrarily decide that today, if you have 10 that you purchased, that we're going to give you a free one. Or tomorrow it might be 5. If you've purchased 5, they're going to give you a free one. We don't know what that number is going to be with the ratio that you bought. Okay. So we call that variable ratio reinforcement. Okay. With time, very similarly, we have fixed and we have variable. Okay. So with variable, with the interval, we're what we could say is maybe some of you go to La Fogata or something I believe they have taco specials on certain days. Does anybody know what day that is? I'll give you a hint. It begins with a T. Taco Tuesdays, right? I'm not promoting them in any way. I actually like going there, but so Taco Tuesdays, every Tuesday you go in there, you get like $1.99 taco. Okay. So that happens every week that occurs. That's that without fail. So we can go, if we expect to be there on a Tuesday, we can expect to have that kind of deal. Okay. We're reinforced to going there because we get a cheaper deal and we get decent food. However, if they said, we're just going to randomly have a day, it doesn't matter how much you go there or how much you purchase, it just occurs on certain days that you show up there. So for fixed, it would be Tuesday. For variable, it would be random. Okay. You may just go on there on a random Thursday and they have, they may have like reduced tacos or reduced margaritas or whatever it is that you like to get there. Okay. So that's really all the differences between fixed interval, variable interval, fixed ratio, and variable ratio. And I know that there were some difficulties and some questions in regards to that on your assignment too, and probably on the quiz. Okay. So does all that make sense? Are we pretty good with operant conditioning? All right. And again, since this was last week and many of you already did the assignment, if you want to go back and reapply this and see if you get this, great. And if you don't, bring it up on Thursday and we can certainly cover it then. All right. So what we're going to delve into this week, and I just wanted to kind of briefly touch upon how memory occurs, okay? Because we learned about, we've demonstrated how learning occurs, and we do that through certain processes in which we can observe that behavior has been modified. It either repeats itself or it avoids happening again because of learning occurs. When learning occurs, that happens through a process we call memory, okay? Many of you are familiar with what memories are, okay? Because we pretty much all have them, unless you have some kind of brain damage or dysfunction within your brain, your organic brain, that prevents you from having memories. Most of you, I would say, probably have pretty good memories because you're in college, right? You took memorization to get here. Maybe some of your memories aren't nearly as good as others, or maybe it's not as good as it used to be. If you're like me and getting a little bit older, you start forgetting things a little bit more, right? So memories occur in different methods and different sequences, and it could be to memorize something over and over, like your quizzes. You're going to be using memories to do your quizzes, right? It could be implicit memory. It could be something that, in fact, let me write this down. Explicit and implicit memories are really the two types of memories that we deal with in terms of external. And that's all that explicit and implicit means, is external and internal. Now, what do I mean by external and internal? So you have an experience. How many of you know the capital of Colorado? Anybody?
I believe it's Boulder, isn't it?
Close. It's not too far from Boulder.
Is it Denver?
It's Denver. Absolutely. How do you know that? Have you ever been to Denver, or have you ever been to Colorado?
I have not. I just kind of figured it was from where, like, I was watching the Broncos game like a week ago, and I was kind of thinking it was in Denver, but I wasn't exactly sure. I figured I'd take a guess.
Okay. But you knew that possibly from maybe fourth grade or something. I forget when we learned state capitals, but when we went over that memorization, even though we didn't live there, we knew that Denver was probably the capital of Colorado. Many of you probably didn't ring in there, but you could have guessed that, right? So that came from some kind of external knowledge, either through a book, either through, in your case, you watched the Broncos game and you heard mention of Denver or something like that. That would be explicit or external memory, okay? Opposite to that, or not opposite, but very close to that, we have implicit memory, internal. I put internal memory. So these are things that happen through experience. So if I ask some of you, what's the capital of West Virginia? What would you say? Oh, come on. I know you know this.
Charleston.
What is Charleston, right? Charleston, because you probably have been there. If you live in West Virginia, I've been there a couple of times. So I know that it's got the Capitol building right downtown. That to me would tell me that there's a good chance that Charleston is the capital, if I didn't know that from some kind of book knowledge somewhere already. So things like riding a bike. Now, we can probably study and watch YouTube videos on how to ride a bike, which would be explicit memory, or we can get out there and start balancing and getting our senses and learn that internally, which would be implicit memory, okay, or procedural, more specifically, because we're going through certain procedures and internalizing that experience to turn that into experience. Okay, that's all, folks. That's really all the difference is between explicit and implicit memories. Okay, so any questions on that so far? Okay. So how do memories occur? How do we look at memories? Because again, as sophisticated as we are with iPhones and science and everything, we don't have a way to really put probes in our brain to see the flow of electrons and how they occur, okay? So what we developed are some concepts or theories of how we think memories occur, just based on the evidence and based on what we've seen. So one of the theories, and I'm going to spend time on this today, and I might cover one of the other theories next week, but we call this one the information processing model. Okay, so information processing, how we take information in from the world around us and then decide what's important, and then we rehearse that, and then we put that into a long-term memory within our brain. Okay, and there are various. There's not really one specific area of the brain that this occurs, okay? Because it uses all of our brain. Remember that 10% rule. I think we debunked that. We use more than 10% of our brain. We use all of our brain. There are several things that can improve memory for us, so that we can not only put it into long-term memory, but retrieve it much later. And that takes practice, doesn't it? So for some of you, it may take a little bit more practice than others. Some of you may be able to get a list, and I'm going to do this probably on Thursday, go through some activities with you to see what you can remember and how we can kind of prime your mind to think of something that might not be on that list. Okay. But in terms of remembering things, we tend to get into this cycle. We get into this process of learning how to remember. Okay. Some of you may have songs that you sing. Maybe you have mnemonics. Maybe you put them in certain orders. Like, for example, if I asked if I can get a volunteer, would any of you be willing to tell me all 7 days of the week?
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Very good. Okay. Something that most of us, hopefully all of us, know. Now, Hunter, if I asked you to repeat them back alphabetically to me, how long would that take you to do it?
It'd probably take me a couple more seconds.
Okay. You want to give it a try?
Sure, I guess. Monday. Yeah, that's going to be hard.
Okay.
It's early in the morning.
All right. Yeah, I'm making you think too much in the morning.
Yeah, I know.
So sorry, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead.
All right. Do you want one more attempt?
I'll try it. Monday. Saturday, Sunday, Thursday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
One more.
Friday before Monday.
There you go. All right. F before M, right?
Yeah.
So we chances are that just over time, many of us have just adopted that model of thinking sequentially, right? Thinking chronologically of those days as opposed to alphabetically. Okay. So that took rehearsal, and that took putting it into your long-term memory and then retrieving it. Now, what I did in that moment was I tricked you. I changed the parameters of reciting those things, which many of us have spent an entire lifetime just memorizing chronologically as opposed to alphabetically. So that's an example of how we store things, just through repetitive motion. Okay. So how the information process model or theory works is we have various stimuli within our environment. Okay. I mean, we are just bombarded with sights and sounds and smells, everything just inundating us, right? When you walk into a room, there could be really thousands of things going on. There could be a certain number of chairs. There could be a certain number of tiles. Maybe one of the lights are out. Maybe I'm wearing a blue shirt. Maybe I'm wearing a red shirt. Maybe there are an infinite numbers of variations of attire that your classmates are wearing. Okay. So we are inundated with stimuli from our environment. Okay. Put on here environment. And do we take all that in? We're capable of paying attention to one thing or another, but we don't assimilate all that information from our environment. Why is that? Why do you think?
Maybe relevance.
Okay. It would make our head explode, wouldn't it? If we were able to remember and take in everything that happens around us, we couldn't process all that. Some people that have eidetic memory are able to remember most things, maybe not everything, but they can remember most things within their environment that normal people wouldn't normally be able to pick up on. So we kind of go through with all this inundation, we go through this memory or sensation buffer. Okay. Which we call selective attention. So as you mentioned, as somebody said, we take in certain things that are important to us. Like for example, if we walked into the classroom and saw somebody sitting in our seat, our normal seat, that would get our attention, right? Or if I was up front and normally I wear a blue shirt, but this day I'm wearing a bright Hawaiian shirt, that would be something that's out of the ordinary, and that would require you to get that attention. Okay. So we narrow down certain things from our environment to produce, So selective attention goes to attention. Okay. So these are the things that we are now going to focus on. All right. So based on that, maybe you walked in and you heard me say something like, good morning, it's a nice day out. And I say that every day. Okay. And that's something that you may have just dismissed over time. Because of habituation, right? Because you're used to me saying that, it's not worth you remembering. So you decide not to really pay attention to what I'm saying there, okay? So with that information, we narrow it down even further into, so let's say you walk into the class and I tell everybody to sit down and get your pencils out because we're gonna have a pop quiz, okay? Now I have your attention. Now that's something that you're just gonna remember that I gave you a list of instructions, or I gave you information that you're going to be using for something else, okay? Which goes into your short-term memory or your working memory, okay? Very synonymous. Your short-term memory is very close to your selective attention, in that your short-term memory, you could probably forget something a little easier if you chose not to put it into your working memory, which is rehearsal, okay, which I'll explain here in just a little bit. All right. So what happens with the information that we put in there is I give you a list of instructions and you start rehearsing it over and over. Maybe you say it to yourself. Maybe you write it down. When you're taking notes and you're preparing for a quiz, you're usually doing what? You're rehearsing, right? You're taking certain information and you're reapplying it over and over again so that you get it, so that it makes sense to you, okay? At some point, that information goes into what we call our long-term memory, which we tend to see light up within our hippocampus, part of our brain. When something goes into a long-term memory, something's stored there for a long period of time, that we do see that light up in our hippocampus part, the inner part of our brain, okay? So that's when information is rehearsed enough that we're able to put that into long-term memory. And it usually takes quite a bit, like days of the week, okay? You probably had to have a lot of exposure to that in order to understand that certain days of the week precede or follow another day of the week, okay? But when we think of them alphabetically, that's something you've never had to perform before or rarely performed in the back. So that rehearsal has not occurred. Now, I guarantee you, Hunter is probably going to, being what I know of him, he's probably going to go home and rehearse that. So that way, if he's ever asked that again, he's going to be more prepared. Am I right, Hunter?
Absolutely.
Okay. So anyway, as we rehearse that information, it goes into our long-term memory. Now, what happens with long-term memory? Does it stay there indefinitely? Probably. Probably a good portion of that is going to remain in our long-term memory for a good portion of time. There's really no prescribed time that it dumps out of our long-term memory, because it's going to also depend on rehearsal, retrieval, and rehearsal. So the process when we retrieve or recall, I think your book uses recall, okay? So the process from retrieving something from our long-term memory is called retrieval or recall. All right, so we recall that information and we put that back into rehearsal again. So some of you that might be good with trivia might get into the practice of hearing something over and over and over again and being able to put that in your long-term memory and retrieve that when you're asked a certain question at a trivia event or something like that, okay? So that's the information processing model that we look at in terms of storing, encoding. I'm sorry, I did mean to say, put that. So when we're encoding, encoding occurs prior to the short-term memory, okay? Storing occurs in the long-term memory. And then, of course, retrieval is the other process by which we get the information out and somehow act on it or recite it or something like that. Okay. Encoding. I don't know why I put that. All right. So any questions on the information processing model? Now, one of the things I like about this, I don't think we have any computer science majors within the class, is this mimics very much what we understand or what we created computers to do. Okay. And if you look at this, I always thought this was interesting. I had a professor that showed me how we have our input, right, which is our encoding, right? We have our processing. Oops. We have our short-term RAM, which is random access memory, which describes the rehearsal process, right? They're little microchips that store information and cache it for very short periods of time as we're using it. And then we have like our hard drive storage, which stores it more permanently until it needs to be overwritten. Now, the one thing that I caution you when you're accepting or you're looking at this model for information processing is that, or any other model for that matter, is we don't, and we're going to cover a lot more of this on Thursday when we talk about it. We don't bring in information like we do a videotape or like a hard drive. Like we have a series of ones and zeros or some kind of sound wave or something that gets stored onto some sort of media, right? That doesn't happen with our brain, okay? Why is that? We can have two different, and we know this to be true because we could have two different people see the exact same event and they remember something differently from that, okay? And that doesn't mean that they didn't get the information correct or they didn't hear it or they didn't see it like the other person saw it. We think in terms of symbols and we think in terms of emotions. So with symbols and emotions, everybody might feel something a little bit different from that, okay? Many of you are probably too young to remember 9/11, for example. That was in my era. That was a time that was relevant to me when I witnessed something that, and when I checked it against my facts against somebody else, they had a different perception of what happened because they were focusing at the time on different things within that environmental stimuli. Okay. So their attention might have been a little bit different and they remembered things in terms of how they felt about it or what was symbolic about it, which gave them in some cases, a completely different memory of that. And we're going to talk more about that on Thursday. But I just wanted to kind of point that out, that we could have the exact same event, singular event, two people seeing that event and getting two different accounts or eyewitness testimony out of that. And many of you that are going into criminal justice, this is going to be important for you to understand because it does happen, especially through some kind of interrogation, right? Or if a traumatic event has occurred, either a national disaster or local disaster, or even just a personal trauma. It could mean something different for everybody. And memory is not the most reliable source of information. Okay. But again, I'm going to go into more details with that on Thursday when we talk about this and do some exercises. All right. Any questions or any thoughts on what I covered so far? Okay. All right. So hopefully that made sense. Those are really the only two areas I wanted to cover today. Again, I've got some really cool exercises and mind benders for you on Thursday, just to kind of demonstrate not only how this works, but how faults can occur and how even in my field, how I can prime certain ideas without actually saying what it is I want you to remember. Okay. So again, we'll go through all that on Thursday. All right. Any questions, any comments, anything before we depart today? All right.